welcome back to my channel. This is Dom and an impromptu series based around this book, What I Picked Up. So this is a book called The Castles of the Marches, and it's written by John Kinross, published by Amberley Books. And I picked this up in the castle at Ludlow Castle. Now, many people will know that I have I've been fortunate enough to have a small place to stay up in Ludlow. We go up there a lot. Loved Ludlow, love the Shropshire Hills, love the whole sort of Welsh marches. And this book's fantastic. I picked it up there because it covers all the castles that are along the Welsh marches. And my wife and I decided that while we're up there over the next coming years, we would take the opportunity to try and visit every single one of them listed on in this book. There's 120 something of them in here. So I thought while I'm doing it, I'll take the camera along, take some pictures, do a little video on each, and if you're interested, this is the result. There'll also be one or two castles that aren't in this book, because there's some other castles around the border areas that aren't necessarily part of this book, and certainly weren't considered Marcher castles, but they're still damn good in their own right. Obviously, Marcher castles refer to the region that was set up by William I after he conquered England in 1066 following the Battle of Hastings. He moved up, recognised that conquering Wales was going to be a rather tough act to do. Well, he had the rest of the country to conquer, so basically he's put some of his most aggressive and sort of formidable lords in charge of the border region, which became the Marches, and they became very powerful in their own right, almost mini kings, had the right to do all sorts of things that only the king had in other parts of the country. And part of their defences were to build a huge number of castles, and you'll see them running all the way down the border between Wales and England, sometimes on one side of the border, sometimes on the other. So anyway, enough of my fluffle. Let's have a look at some pictures of some of these castles. Hope you enjoy it. The castle of Grosmont is located, funny enough, in the village of Grosmont, a really pretty little village in Monmouthshire in Wales, just outside of Abergavenny. It was part of what's known as the Three Castles, which was specially built to defend an open area of land which was a passageway for the Welsh to invade other parts of Wales that were controlled by the English and ultimately into England. It's an amazing little castle, actually, and really one of those little gems that you find. It's completely ruined these days. Apparently, originally, as many of these castles were along the March border, was an earth and timber castle built by the Normans following the invasion of England in 1066. Originally, they believe it was commissioned by William Fitz-Osbern, who was Earl of Hereford, given one of the important marches by William I. But in 1135, there was a major Welsh rebellion, and in response, King Stephen, who was king at the time, basically brought together Grosmont and the sister castles of Skenfrith and White Castle to form a lordship that was known as the Three Castles. And they continued to play a really important role in defending the region against Welsh attacks for several centuries afterwards. The infamous King John gave the castle Grosmont to Hubert de Burgh in 1201. And in the course of the next decade or so, it passed backwards and forwards between several owners, including Hubert, a rival family called the de Brassots, and the crown itself. Hubert rebuilt the castle in stone, beginning with a new hall, and then began on the rest of the property in 1219, adding a curtain wall, gatehouse, and towers. In 1233, a royal army camped outside the castle was attacked by rebel forces under the command of Richard Marshall. Edmund, the Earl of Lancaster, gained possession of the castle in 1267, and it remained in his hands until and later that of the Duchy of Lancaster until 1825. When Edward invaded Wales in 1282, it removed a lot of the importance of the three castles. And so, although it was besieged again in 1405 in the Glendower Rising, by the 16th century it had fallen into disuse and ruin. And the castle was placed into care of the state in 1922 and is now managed by Welsh Heritage Agency, the equivalent of English Heritage, and it's an amazing place. It still evokes those sort of, I guess, defensive positions that overlook the hills and lands around where at any moment Welsh raiders could come through. Very, very impressive. Much of what you see at Grosmont Castle today is part of the original 14th century additions that Hubert de Burgh built. It originally comprised an inner and outer ward, but the latter has been encroached on by local gardens. The outer ward would have had a rectangular store or stable as well. The inner ward forms a stone castle with a gatehouse, two circular towers, a hall, and a northern accommodation block. And the whole was protected by a ditch. The whole thing was protected by a ditch. Originally, obviously, other timber buildings would have been raised outside of the stone walls to accommodate servants, but there's only limited traces of those apparently within it. The gatehouse originally would have been 2 stories, a rectangular tower with 14th century additions, including a buttressed drawbridge pit, but only limited parts of that still survive. The southwest tower was converted into a 3-story suite of rooms in the 14th century. Its basement was filled in. And the 3-story west tower was also altered during the 14th century and its basement filled in. The north block is primarily a 14th century addition to the castle, built over what remains of the circular towers and the postern gate. It comprises 3 distinct buildings, the largest being a 3-story residential tower. The block has a very distinctive octagon chimney with carved tops. Definitely not very medieval, those. The whole block is a 2-story building. Originally, the floors would have been linked by spiral staircases, and the first floor of the block contains a hall with a solar separated by a wooden divide. The hall had a fireplace in the middle of exterior walls with 2 large windows on either side, and the ground floor had 2 service rooms lit by narrow loop windows, and an external staircase would have led up directly to the main hall from the inner ward. The only recorded military actions that took place at Grosmont, as I said, was from the Owen Glendower rebellion in 15th century. There was a battle between the Welsh and Richard Beauchamp, 13th Earl of Warwick, near Grosmont in 1404, leading to an English victory. The castle was besieged the next year by Owen's son, but was relieved by forces sent by Prince Henry. So by 1538, Grosmont, as I said, had fallen into disuse and then into ruin. And in 1563, a survey noted that the bridge collapsed, and although the outer walls were intact, the inner was in decay, and its building materials inside had either been removed, presumably by locals, or were rotten through. And in 1613, it was described as ruinous and decayed. But nowadays it's been set aside and is part of the English heritage, Welsh heritage, as I say, and it's a really nice place to visit, very quiet, very unassuming. The village itself around it is beautiful, and the landscape, well, it's Welsh hills, absolutely stunning. Well worth a visit if you're in that part of Wales.